pie recipe, starting with the crust. It's flour, salt, sugar, and cold butter. I actually froze mine, so you can kind of see there it's still so cold it's not letting me really incorporate it. I'm going to set it aside. We're going to start working on the apples. It took about 5 apples for me, and just regular size apples, but you can kind of tell if it's going to fill a pie plate as you're working with it. If you have small apples, you may need to use more. But chunk them up. Don't slice them. If you slice them, I've found that it just turns really mushy. Whereas if you keep them in chunks, you're still going to have a cooked apple, but it's going to have a lot of really good apple flavor. So chunk up your apples. A tart apple I find is best. But you could even mix tart and really sweet, like the red apples, for example, mixed with a Granny Smith would also be good. But I just use tart in this one. I think it works better because they are a little bit harder and they do keep their shape a little bit better, but also that tartness combined with the cinnamon sugar mixture that you're going to be adding, that is just really a good flavor. And this is a pie that is not going to be extremely sweet. That's another reason it's one of my favorites. And I do like the crust better with this one because it is made with the butter. So all of that combined is just yummy. Alright, now back to the crust, because the butter got just a little bit more room temperature for me. I went ahead and added my egg yolks and also apple cider vinegar. Keep some ice water nearby as well. You know how it is working with doughs. Sometimes they're a little drier. That's what happened to me on this one. Once I got in there with my hands and started mixing it, I could tell it was still entirely too dry. I know weather can affect that, so I always just like to have that ice water nearby. I could tell that my butter was room temperature enough. All the moisture from the butter was coming out that I needed. So I just added in 1 teaspoon increments until I had enough. But you want to just go ahead and continue to combine, or continue to mix. Now while I'm mixing that, I did think this would be a good recipe to share since the holidays are coming and most people do like apple pie. So, but again, this one, I want you to try it because again, it's not as sweet as most, and with this butter pie crust, instead of shortening, gives it a whole different taste. We love this pie. We're not big dessert people. At the holidays mostly is when we have it, but about maybe 3 times a year I do make this pie because we do really like it. And once you see your dough starting to come together for you, you are going to separate it into 2 and have either saran wrap or maybe just a baggie nearby to go ahead and put half of the crust in so that it does keep its moisture while you're rolling out the bottom crust. One thing I didn't do that I would suggest that you do, I just wasn't thinking about it. Once you separate the crust, go ahead and put the top crust in the refrigerator. Just let it be chilling, because then what you're going to do with the top crust, or at least I did in this one, you're going to need it to be a little bit cold. You don't want it to be too soft or it's going to be harder to work with. So go ahead and just put that in the refrigerator. Meanwhile, you guys know how to roll out a pie crust, but just flour your surface, roll out the pie crust, and get it into the dish. And yes, this is a good time, if you haven't already started preheating the oven, go ahead and do that, 350. And guys, don't worry too much about your pie crust as far as if it's a perfect circle, if you don't get it in the pan perfectly. Somebody told me once that I was getting way too stressed out over that whenever I would try to put it in my pie plate and it would come apart. And what they said was right. You know, just get it in there. You don't even have to roll it out. You could pinch off little pieces and put them in and just cover, you know, the bottom of the plate with them and up the sides, because once that thing is in there and cooked and all of, you know, your filling is covering it, nobody's going to see that. So I don't know why I stressed all these years about it. But once you get it, and you'll see here in just a few seconds, whenever I put it in the dish, I get a little hole in it, and I didn't have it perfectly centered, so it wasn't going up the sides. All that is fine. Okay, so there you see it. And literally all I do is, as I'm pushing it in, I'm going to start taking off the excess, and I will use that excess and go back and fill it in. If it's a hole or if it ripped, you know, just push it back together once it's in the dish. It's really nothing to stress about. Then once I got the crust in there and the way I wanted it, I did put it in the refrigerator so that it could start to chill while I was working on the top crust and getting the apples ready to go in. Okay, just getting the sugar mixture ready for the apples. And very easy, just 4 tablespoons all-purpose flour, half teaspoon, anywhere from a half to a whole teaspoon of cinnamon, depending on your taste. I gave it a dash of salt, not quite the full half teaspoon, because my butter was salted. And a half cup of white sugar. Just get that all mixed up, and then you're going to just roll or coat your apples in that. I did reserve about a tablespoon back because you're going to want to sprinkle that on the bottom, onto, you know, your pie crust before you put the apples in. A tablespoon was way too much, so just reserve a little. But once I got the apples coated, I did go ahead and set that aside as well. I like to let it sit and let the moisture from the apples really absorb that cinnamon sugar. So meanwhile, I got out the other crust. You can just roll out a flat crust if you want, put it on top of your pie. That's great. I like to do something a little different. If I do put on a flat crust, where I am trying to ventilate it, I use my knife and I carve an apple in the top of it. Or, this is what I like to do, it takes longer, but cut out some just, you know, rough leaves, little oblong leaves, put little slits on each side, and you can lightly even trace a line down the center of it for the leaf vein. You want to have a light hand at that. You don't want to cut through. But I just make a ton of those. I use all my dough, except I leave enough to make an apple. You could do all kinds of things, though. You could literally just do an apple and then maybe make a fluted crust around it. That would be cute, too. Just for looks is the only reason I'm doing this. I like the way it looks. And it's not difficult. It just takes you some time to cut out your leaves. This is why I said it's good to have that crust a little bit chilled. It makes it easier to work with. If it's soft, it's hard to go in and cut those little slits like that. When it's soft, it just wants to cling to the blade, and it's just more difficult. So, chill the crust. See, very simple little leaf. And then I didn't show you how I cut the apple, but you know, it's an apple. If you are intimidated by cutting things like that, grab a coloring book that has an apple in it, cut it out, lay it down, and trace around it. Anything like that. Doesn't have to be an apple. It could be anything that you were wanting to put on it. When I make my chicken pot pies, I had thought about getting a chicken and cutting out and putting on. But just an idea there to make it look a little bit cuter than just a flat crust. So just dump all your apples in. Use a little bit of water around the edges just to help hold that top crust on that you're putting down. Now there's no rhyme or reason to this. You just put the leaves on. Once you get the leaves on, the apple's the last thing that you put on. That way you clearly see that apple. It's the star of the show. And the leaves are just there, to cover the rest of the pie and to look kind of cute. I don't think I've put my pot pie recipe on here. I may do that sometimes as well. Very easy to make. If you need a quick meal, it's definitely the way to go. Yes, another thing that I do on all of my pies, not just this one, is I take a little piece of Reynolds wrap and I go around the edge of it. I leave that on there to try to keep those edges from burning. But here you can see the finished product, and it was delicious. We enjoyed a slice, and then we sent it over to my sister-in-law. So you guys have a great